everyone, it's Maya Guice with part 6. That's right, the final installment of Sugarball Behind the Book, a companion podcast series where I talk to R. Procter about his new book, Sugarball, a novel of Negro League baseball. If you're just joining us, I'd recommend you start with part 1. In this final episode, I ask Arlie to pull back the curtain. My burning question for the author, what's real and what's not? Join us as we unravel the threads of fact and fiction, delving into the mind of the storyteller and his creative process, where the rich tapestry of history meets the art of storytelling. A Guardia Nacional uses the silver bayonet on his rifle to shove me up against a pockmarked freestanding red brick wall in the middle of this courtyard. This is a dang firing squad! El Presidente Trujillo struts out in a new outfit, khaki green army fatigues. The ceremonial sword is gone. Now he's got a gaudy chrome-plated military pistol on his hip. He strides over to the lineup and looks us over. I did not bring you players here to lose this tournament. Ready? The soldiers shoulder the rifles. Aim! The soldiers sight us down their rifle barrels. I have never been so scared in my life. Fire! The air explodes with an ear-splitting crack of thunder as the riflemen let fly. I'm hit! Ain't I? I feel a sharp pain, but it's in my arm. Josh has grabbed me. I suddenly realize that I'm screaming my head off. I stop when I see his face smiling through the rifle smoke. I look around. Everyone's still alive. The rifle barrels of the Guardia Nacionals are aimed about an inch over our heads. The firing squad missed on purpose to scare the daylights out of us. Here we are again, Rich.
Yeah, this is great.
It's our sixth and final episode.
Oh boy, I'm gonna miss it.
So you've by no means claimed this book to be 100% historically accurate, and as the author, you of course have license to take certain liberties. And so today, I really wanted to just unpack because there's so much crazy stuff that happens in the book.
Right.
I'm dying to know what's true and where maybe you stretch the truth just a little bit.
Good.
So I'm going to talk about a couple things that happen in the book, and then you can tell me whether or not it's true.
Okay, that's great.
So one of the things that happens in the book that sounds crazy is, of course, the team is in the DR. They are losing games because they're having a little too much fun partying at night. And essentially they get put in front of a firing squad as a way of warning them that,
right.
You're not here to lose games. We brought you here to win the game. So
right.
Is that true? Did that happen?
Well, one of the great things that I love about this story is that often the craziest stuff is the true stuff. The firing squad is absolutely true. And the reason I know this is because several of the players left memoirs, and at least 3 of the players mentioned the firing squad. What happened is they were there for this short series. They lost a couple of games because they were partying too much. Because they were so beloved in the DR, all of these people wanted to take them out and celebrate them. And they had so much trouble with race prejudice in the U.S., they were just delighted with being held up as the gods they were. Mm-hmm. So after they lost the game, they were supposed to get back in the bus, and the bus was going to take them back to their hotel. Well, the bus didn't go back to the hotel. The bus took them to a prison where true story, they were lined up against a brick wall, and there was a firing squad there. And they're all, oh my God. And Trujillo himself is there. Trujillo comes out, does the ready aim, and then at the last second, he says fire, and the players fire about 6 inches above the players' heads. And Trujillo says, I didn't bring you down here to lose these games. And so they sort of got the point. That was the time when they started to say, this isn't what it seems to be. So we need to figure out what's really going on. That's when they found out all of the stuff about the sugar growers and Trujillo's election and who Trujillo really was and how he was thought of by the people, which is as this kind of fascist tyrant type. And so true story.
Sounds like a real gentle reminder. A subtle refocusing.
Yes.
Amazing. And the Pittsford Crawfords, who, these Procter you're playing for when the book kicks off, and Peanut's working for that team. Is it true that the Crawfords, that they were owned by a gangster?
Yes. They were owned by a guy named Gus Greenlee, who started out as a bootlegger in Pittsburgh in the late 1920s, made a lot of money as a bootlegger. When Prohibition ended in 1933, he decided to move into what was called numbers. I don't know. Do you know what numbers are? No, numbers were I guess you'd call it a racket. There was basically a numbers runner would go around to various locations, and people would bet on 3 numbers, 5, 7, 8, and then give the numbers runner a dime or $1 or whatever. So then the next day, 3 numbers would be posted as the winning numbers, and if you won, you got paid off, I think, like it's 6 to 1 or 10 to 1 or something like that. So it was this kind of like it was based on quantity as opposed to quality. In other words, like in Pittsburgh, there were thousands of people every day who played the numbers, and usually the 3 numbers were taken from typically like the New York Stock Exchange at the end of the day, the last 3 numbers of that day's number of transactions. So everybody could go to the paper and see what the numbers were.
Oh, how funny.
Yeah. This was a hugely lucrative business. And Greenlee was a very, very successful businessman / gangster because he, as in anybody in his business, he had enforcers, and if you didn't pay your debts, he would make sure that those debts got paid. That this was the story of the Negro Leagues generally. Most of the people who owned teams were either in that shady business or they were entertainers. Like Bill Bojangles Robinson owned a team. Louis Armstrong owned part of a team in New Orleans. But mostly it was marginal types. And a couple of the teams were owned by white people as well.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't know this about Bojangles.
Yeah, he owned the New York Black Yankees.
Oh, crazy.
A lot of musicians and entertainers were huge baseball fans and black baseball fans. So.
Neat. We see Satchel Paige a couple times. He has this routine with chewing gum wrapper,
Right.
and he brings in the infielders to throw the other team off.
Yeah.
Is this true? Would he do a lot of this type of thing?
This is absolutely true. He was he pitched in so many games. Usually, they might save him for the last 3 innings of the game. A special appearance by Satchel Paige, and oftentimes his team would be up by 1 run, and Paige would have this routine where first of all, he brought the whole outfield and sat them down in the infield. Then he took a package of chewing gum out of his pocket. But he put the gum in his mouth, and he took the silver wrapper, and he walked down and put the silver wrapper on the edge of home plate. And he said to the umpire, "That's home plate for the next 3 batters." And then, in order to make this work, he had to strike out the side, because if anybody hit the ball, like at all, if it would have been inside the park home run. And famously, I don't know of a single instance where that didn't work. So, imagine something to talk about as you went home that day.
Yeah, just reliving, the shenanigans. Almost.
Yeah, anybody could pull that off. The chutzpah of that was just magnificent.
Another question I have is, we meet this guy named Enrique Ibar. Ibar, he's the guy who ends up, handing over, he makes the offer to these players. He has the suitcase of, tons of money from the Dominican Republic. Is he a real person?
He was a real person, yes. That's another sort of amazing, true part of the story. He was Trujillo's man in the United States. So Trujillo sends Ibar to the U.S. with $30,000 in cash. That's equivalent to $600,000 in cash today, and gives him instructions that he's to find Satchel Paige. He is to give him this suitcase. He is to tell Satchel Paige, that, I want you to find 8 other players, pay them any part of the 30,000 you wish, keep the rest, bring them to the DR for this baseball tournament. And Ibar, throughout the series, stayed with the team. In the very last game, he's the one who was in the locker room who said, if you don't win this game, it's unlikely that you're going to leave the field alive. So he was there through the end. I believe he even came back to the U.S. The players came back and they toured for a while. They barnstormed as Trujillo's All-Stars. Mm. And there's a famous picture of Ibar sitting in the middle, the team photo. So, he was involved with them for about a year.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, he's basically part of the team. Probably.
He is. He's essentially the manager, the business manager anyway.
Mm-hmm. And is it true that Trujillo demanded a 10% kickback from the players, even though he was bringing them there to play for him?
There's a scene where they in the book where Satchel, Trujillo says some version. They're at his the reception, and Ibar, I think, says some version of the players have gratefully decided to donate 10% of their salary to Trujillo. This is the first time the players have heard about this, and Satchel goes out of his mind and says, well, wait a minute here, And that's true. And everybody in the DR who is in any way connected with the government or any of the businesses that Trujillo had nationalized to be part of the government as part of his kleptocracy, yes, they all donated 10% off the top of their salaries to him. To the DR government, which was Trujillo. Mm-hmm. So, yes.
Well, aren't we glad our employers don't do that? Paying a tax to get paid. Did Satchel Paige really jump from the DL team to play for the sugar owners? Did that happen?
No, that is something I invented. I was trying to come up with a way to deepen the drama. So, and I made that. I could make that work in my own mind because Satchel was a guy who would jump any team if he was offered more money, and so the sugar owners offer him more money in the book, and he jumps over to their team. This also, of course, sets up the very end of the book, where the very end of the last game, where Satch gets to pitch to Josh, and there's a whole running argument through the book about who's better, Satch or Josh, and does great pitching defeat great hitting, or does great hitting defeat great pitching? And so they finally get to decide that in the very last play of the very last game. But no, I invented that.
We learn we learn in the book that Trujillo ordered the killing of 17,000 Haitians.
Right.
Is this true? Is this a part of his history?
This is true, and it took place in 1937, although it took place about 2.5 months after the baseball tournament. So I wanted to bring that in because it's an amazing piece, horrifying piece of lost history. But yes, that's definitely true. It was called the I think the Butterfly Massacre, but there's several books on it. Several DR writers have written about it. Trujillo was someone who believed in the same racial theories as Hitler, and Haitians had darker skin than people in the Dominican Republic, and the sugar growers were bringing Haitians in to help them harvest the sugar. And Trujillo had this irrational thing about the pollution of the DR race by these Haitians or whatever, and he ordered his National Guard to slaughter the Haitians who were in the DR with machetes. So it was even more horrifying. I think in some ways it's more horrifying than if they were shot. So they were macheted to death and thrown to the sharks, which is in the book.
And I imagine knowing this obviously put the sort of final game into clear focus for the players. Where, I mean, were they really playing for their lives?
Well, as I said, that was called the Parsley Massacre. I'm sorry, the Parsley Massacre took place 3 months after the players left the DR. But it is true the players thought they were and probably were playing for their lives, because in the last game, where it all came down to this last game, where if Trujillo lost, he would have been disgraced directly before the presidential election, where had he lost, everything would have been lost for him. He had his militia lining the stadium. So imagine you had 1,500 troops on a baseball field lining the field with chrome helmets and guns glistening in the sun. You could hardly have a more direct statement of the stakes of the game than that. And the players knew those were the stakes.
Well, thank goodness we didn't have to find out.
Yes.
And last but, of course not least, what happens after the last game? Like, we know that they managed to escape back to the U.S., but, what became of these players?
Well, in the book, this is yet another thing I invented. In the book, after the last game, when they think, okay, the last game's taken place, now we can get out of here, Trujillo gets up and says, I'm making these players the Dominican national team, and they're going to stay here and play. So now the players are faced with, how do we escape from the island? And so there's a chase scene where they have to, I think, in a very hopefully clever way, deceive their captors and manage to get off the island. The truth is that after the last game, Trujillo said to them, I'd love it if you would go on a goodwill tour and play some games throughout the Dominican Republic to publicize our great victory. And they said, yes, of course. Then they went down and got on the Pan Am Clipper and got out of there as quickly as possible. But they did, once they came back, they did tour as Trio's All-Stars for a while. But they could not wait to get out of there because, they knew as long as they were there that their lives were in danger. So
yeah, it's one thing to have your life sort of at risk at home, familiar territory.
Yeah,
quite another to be in a different country.
That's true.
Yeah, but again, it just sort of speaks to the promise in one place, right? The grass is always greener, you say, right?
That's true. I made most of these changes because I wanted this book to appeal to young people who had read Harry Potter, and I wanted them to have that kind of sense of fun and danger and jeopardy, and think that, boy, I've got to learn more about this. So that was my goal. So far, I'm getting good reactions. So
yeah, I would say you've accomplished it.
Oh, thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Rich. Again, congratulations on completing the book, on publishing it.
Yeah,
it's a masterpiece. And I can't wait for the next one.
Oh, well, good. Yeah, good. So I'm pondering several subjects. Among them, doing a book about. Something happened in 1939 where there was a big band singer named Herb Jeffries who was sang with the Earl Hines Band. And Jeffries was doing a gig, and he went out behind the theater to smoke a cigarette, and there's a little kid there. This is a true story. There's a little kid there who's crying, a black kid. And Jeffries goes over and says, well, what's wrong? And the kid said, well, we were playing Cowboys and Indians, but they wouldn't let me be a cowboy because they said there were no black cowboys. And Jeffries is outraged by this and saying, yeah, of course, there was a lot of black cowboys. There's some famous ones. So, true story, Herb Jeffries found a movie producer who produced B Westerns, and he and this movie producer produced 4 Westerns with all black casts. One was called Harlem West of the Pecos, Harlem Rides the Range, The Bronze Buckaroo Rides Again. He's called himself the Bronze Buckaroo. So I'm thinking that's a great story to do, the story about that, what it was like to do that. Once again, as a kid, sidekick, see it through his eyes.
Okay, well, tell me when it's done, Rich.
Okay, I will.
I'll read it.
You'll get the very, very first copy.
Sugarball, Behind the Book, is produced and edited by Matthew Solari and hosted by myself, Maya Guice. This episode's version of Take Me Out to the Ball Game was arranged and performed by E. Jammy Jams. You can find Sugarball, a novel of Negro League baseball, everywhere books are available. To learn more about RLE, visit richlyspun.com.